Today we will be looking at asset rationalization and disposal methods. And we will be looking at how organizations can be able to determine when is the right time to dispose of their assets. In the last class, we had looked at aged assets. You see that it comes to a point where the organization now realizes that it is either a bit too costly for the business to maintain an asset, or maybe the asset is not producing the goods at the level of efficiency that is desirable, or that the machine is always breaking down. So as a result of that, you see that it is important for businesses to decide to now to decide to dispose of the assets. So we will be looking at just understanding what are the various approaches to disposing the assets, and also how do we decide when to dispose of the assets in the company. So we'll start off with a few definitions, and in this case the first definition we have is asset rationalization. And when we say asset rationalization, basically this is the process of reorganizing a company's assets to improve the operating efficiency, and also to just help improve the overall productivity of that particular machine. So you find that within the organization you have assets. Some assets might be new, some assets might be old, some assets might be effective, some assets might not be effective. So it is important for the organization to just look at the assets that they have and try to denote or try to show for these assets that we have, are they working, and are they working to the degree of efficiency that we're looking for? Or is it that they're not currently performing the way they are expected to perform? And if they're not performing the way they're expected to perform, then you try to just reorganize. You can dispose of some assets. You can close off some facilities in the business if they're not performing to the epitome. You can replace some assets with others. So that process of just trying to reorganize the assets in a company in the way they're used with the intention of improving operational efficiency, that is what we classify as asset rationalization. So you find that asset rationalization may be achieved by divesting certain assets. Divesting means letting go some assets that you had invested in. So divesting is the opposite of investing in certain assets. In this case, you divest some certain assets that you have in the company. You might close down some facilities, or you might expand others that are doing well and you feel that they have a lot of potential, and also just streamline the activities of the business in the factory, or you streamline what you call your manufacturing process. So that is what we classify as asset rationalization. Then we have the other one is asset disposal. And asset disposal, essentially, this is the activity involved in letting go the assets of the business. You get rid of them either by replacing them, or just by maybe you don't need that asset anymore, so you just sell it off without having to replace them. So that is what we call asset disposal. So asset disposal, you can define it as the act of selling an asset. And this one is usually a long-term asset that has been depreciated over its useful life, like production equipment that you've been using them for some time. They are no longer as effective and efficient as they were before. So you decide that because they're no longer as efficient as you would desire them to be, you decide to dispose them off. So that one we call them asset disposal. So when you're thinking of asset disposal, then there are some decisions that you need to make. There are some factors that you need to consider. You don't just wake up and now you decide that you're going to replace the asset. So you have to take into consideration this particular asset. When did you buy it? What is the current value of the asset? If we are to sell that asset, how much would we sell it at? If we were to replace it, how much would we require to top up in order to replace this asset? And again, current level of efficiency. Why have you decided to replace this asset? Is it because maybe it is not producing as much goods as you would have desired? Or is it because the asset is not maybe just doing or doing what it's supposed to do, the level of productivity is not able to achieve? Or is it because maybe there is a new method of doing things within the organization or the industry, and now you would want to now utilize the new method? So that is those are some of the factors that you need to consider when you are now just looking into making a replacement decision for your assets. That you have to take into consideration the cost that you will incur, the current productivity level, is it enough, or you need to improve your efficiency? What machine do you need to acquire in order to now improve that efficiency level? Why is it that you have decided again to just replace the asset? So you have to make various decisions, and you're going to look at those decisions that you're going to be making when it comes to replacement of assets. So there are two common replacement decisions that need to be made. And these replacement decisions, we categorize them. Either it could be because there is a sudden failure in the asset, that the asset just one time it broke down, and maybe it is not repairable, or it is very expensive to repair, so you'd rather just buy a new asset. It could be that these assets, when they do what, when they break down or when they suddenly fail, you can't, there is no maybe repairing them. You know, some things you just can't repair, some things you just have to replace them. For example, a light bulb. If a light bulb burns, what happens? Ikiungua, you're just supposed to replace them, not to, maybe not to change a part of that bulb. So in that case, then when there is a sudden failure, then you'll find that the business might decide to replace the asset. Then we have the other one is gradual deterioration. That when the asset deteriorates such that it has really depreciated, you've seen that the asset is really worn out, it is torn to an extent that it increases the amount of maintenance that is required. Let's say, for example, you're always having this machine is always breaking down. You always have to have someone come in every single week to do the repairs. In that case, you will see that the organization will just consider that the cost of maintaining this asset is way too much compared to the cost of now just buying a new asset. So now in that case, when the items that you have or the assets that the business has deteriorates gradually due to wear and tear, due to them being aged assets, maybe they are obsolete, then the organization will just consider replacing them with a new asset that is able to function more effectively. So the next thing that we look at are the factors to consider in asset replacement decisions. What are those things that the business is going to consider when they are looking into replacing a new asset with an old asset? So there are several factors. The first factor is that you need to consider the capital cost of the new asset. You'll find that the investment in assets is not, especially for the capital assets, is not it's not an easy thing. You'll find that the organization is going to be incurring a lot of cost. This is going to cost a little bit more money compared to the non-current assets. It means that the company has to consider what is the cost of this new asset? How much are we going to acquire it at? Are we going to acquire it at 100,000? Is it 500,000? Is it 200,000? Either way, the organization needs to take into consideration the cost, because it's a lot of money. They need to plan ahead for it, get the funds, and then now go and acquire the asset. Then where are you going to acquire the sources or the funds that you're going to use to finance this assets? Where will you get the money? Is it that this money is already available in the business? Maybe the company has some reserves, or is it that you're going to have to maybe get a loan? Where are you going to get these funds? Are you going to get a loan? Are you going to lease the asset? Are you going to do what? Are you going to do hire purchase for the asset? So those factors, they need to be considered greatly when it comes to now asset replacement. You don't just wake up and say you're going to replace. Where is the money going to come from? Does the business have the money, or do we have to borrow the funds? So the sources to acquire the funds is very important, because where you acquire the funds again is going to influence the total amount you'll pay. Because if, for example, you got a loan of 100,000 to buy the asset, you're going to have to pay an interest on top of it when you do the repayments, meaning that it is going to be, or the asset will be, you would have bought it at a cost higher than 100,000. So if, for example, you're charged what? If, for example, you're charged 500,000, sorry, 5%. So it means that 5% of 100,000, it means that you'll have to pay an extra 5,000 when you're replacing or you're paying back the loan. So you have to consider the sources of the fund and how much again it is going to cost you to now utilize that resource. Then we have the other one you need to consider is currently what are the operating costs or running costs of the existing assets. To say that sometimes you going to replace the asset simply because it has become very expensive for you to utilize that asset. So you'll find that the asset needs to be done what the asset needs to be. You need to consider the maintenance. How much in total are you spending? Maybe every single week, you have to pay a maintenance worker to come in, looking, do the maintenance. So you have to consider, has there been an increase in the repairs and maintenance costs over the past few periods? And also for this particular product, this particular asset, maybe it is producing low quality products or low quantity in terms of number of units that you would have desired to produce, it's producing less. So you just need to consider, because you'll find that if the operating costs have increased significantly over the years, then you'd rather now just replace the asset, because you find that the operating costs usually increase as the asset depreciates and deteriorates over the years. So you consider at the moment, how much is it? Is it too expensive? It is not that expensive. You can consider doing what? You can consider just using the asset the way it is without having to replace it. But if the maintenance cost is high, the quality has gone down, the quantity, the number of units it's producing has gone down, again, in such a case, you have to now just take the decision to replace that particular asset. So those are some of the factors that you would consider in asset replacement decisions. Then we look at the reasons for replacement of assets in the company. So aside from the factors that we have looked at, so you have looked at those factors. For example, you have looked at the quantity that is being produced by the machine. You've looked at the quality of the products that are being produced again by the machine. And you realize that the quantity and quality have reduced. Then you're increasing, you have a lot of maintenance costs that you are incurring. So you now see that these factors exist, and you also realize that replacing the asset is actually going to result in lower costs for the business in the long term. So you decide and opt to just replace that asset. Now, instead of incurring this cost for a very long time, which again ends up now increasing the total cost of ownership. So to avoid that, then you just go ahead and replace the asset now, so that you avoid those costs being too much. So we look at the reasons for replacement of equipment. And of course, the first one is deterioration. Once you have seen that the asset has deteriorated, the performance has declined, the quality is bad, the quantity is low, the equipment is worn out and torn. So it will mean that the asset has served its purpose, it has served its useful life, and the next thing you need to do is to replace them. So you'll be able to note that an asset has deteriorated when you see various factors. When you see various factors regarding that particular asset. For example, the increase in maintenance cost, you've talked about this. You say that when the maintenance costs are high, it means that the business is going to be replacing parts here and there, incurring a lot of cost to pay the person who is doing the repairs and the maintenance. So you realize that because now the parts are always being replaced, it means that these original parts are worn out, they are torn, and therefore the asset has deteriorated. Then, of course, the reduction in quality and rate of production. That one again denotes deterioration in an asset, because if an asset is effective, then it will be able to produce high quality goods at a high quality goods, and also a good number of units. That if you're expecting 10,000 units, at least you should be able to produce something close to the 10,000 units in a week. Then also, if it has resulted in increased labor costs being the employees have to do more manual work compared to initially, because you had automated your processes, but now you find that employees are doing more in terms of producing those goods than the machines are, then it means that now your assets have deteriorated. Then when you have loss of operating time due to breakdowns, that when the machine now breaks down, it means that there's no production. And if there's no production, it means that now again the company is losing out because no units are produced. Therefore, the productivity goes down. The other one we have is the other reason you might be considering, or the organization might consider to do an asset replacement, is if the assets become obsolete. That for technology, you'll find that technology usually progresses fast. You find that every now and then we have newer and better equipment being developed and produced. So the kinds of machines that were there 5 years ago, 10 years ago, are not the same machines and equipment that are currently being used by organizations. So as a result of new technology coming in, it means that the older technology that your machines were using, they become obsolete. And when they become obsolete, it means that the organization will have to now upgrade and update their technology just to be able to to be able to incorporate the new technology, because you find that new technology comes in with better products, higher quality products, lower costs, and higher volume of production. So if you find that your asset is becoming obsolete, there's new technology that you can be able to utilize, then the organization can decide that they are going to replace their assets. So in this case, you'll find that it is important if you want to stay with in line with your competition, because when your competition is using better methods, better techniques, and you're just stuck with the old ways, it means that you'll be left behind. So to avoid that, then you'd rather just replace the assets so that you can always stay at par with your competition. So you're saying that technology is progressing fast, and newer and better equipment are being developed and produced every single year. The equipment gets obsolete due to advancement in technology, and the unwarranted manufacturing costs arising from such obsolete equipment is going to result in reduced profit. It is also going to reduce the level of competition for the company, because the other firms are producing these goods at a higher, at a lower cost, first and foremost. And then aside from a lower cost, they are also doing what? They are also producing higher quality products at a lower cost, more efficiently, more effectively. So if you're not able to match that, it means that you will not be able to compete. They'll be able to attract the consumers, actually almost all consumers in the business, which means that you'll be left with none. So to avoid that, then it is important for the organization to just consider replacing those assets that are obsolete. And then, of course, it causes loss in value of the machinery. If you have an asset that is obsolete, you can't even be able to sell it at a good price. So you'd rather replace it now to avoid it being even of a lesser value in the future. Then the other reason a business can consider replacing an asset is when there is inadequacy, that the machine is, or the equipment has become inadequate such that it cannot be able to meet the demand. It cannot be able to meet the demand for the goods that are required, that it's not able to produce as much goods as expected. So you find that there is always a desired level of production. You talked about the standard level that a machine should be able to produce. So maybe you've looked at this machine and its capacity, and you've realized that this machine, if everything is working smoothly, the machine should be able to produce a certain number of units within maybe an hour. Maybe it should be able to produce 10 units within an hour, and it's only able to produce 2 or 3 units within that hour. In this case, you'll realize that this machine is actually inadequate. It is not capable of producing the desired level of units, or the production rate is so low. So in such a case, then you would have to consider replacing that asset. So we say that when the existing equipment becomes inadequate to meet the demand, or it is not able to increase the production rate to the desired level, then the question of replacement arises. That in this case, you'll just consider replacing the asset, because it is not doing what it is supposed to do. So you'd rather just replace it, get one that is going to be effective, get one that is going to be able to produce at the desired level. Then we have the other factor is the working conditions. You also have to take into consideration the working conditions of that particular asset. You see that these assets, as they get older, they tend to be unsafe. For example, they tend to be especially due to wear and tear. They tend to be very unsafe and hazardous to the employees that can lead to accidents. They tend to be a little bit noisy. They tend to produce a lot of smoke and a lot of pollution. So if you find that the machine has become just unpleasant to work with, it's very noisy, it is produces a lot of smoke, it produces a lot of pollution to the air. It is a little bit it has become unsafe, and therefore it's a safety hazard to the employees and the workers in the organization. Then in such a case, you can consider again replacing this asset. Then the other one, or the last factor that you need to consider, is now that the asset has outlived its effective useful life. You see, each asset, when you buy, you know that this asset is going to last for this couple of years. So let's say the intention was that the asset was to last in the business for like 5 years or 10 years. When the 10 years have reached, then it means that they have outlived their effective life. And therefore, you should consider replacing those assets now, so that at the end of the day, it doesn't become uneconomical for you to have them, because you say that when you're having an old asset that is obsolete, that is not functioning well, it is going to be very costly for you to maintain. So to avoid all those costs, then the business would just rather replace them when the asset has actually outlived its expected useful life. So those are the factors, or some of the reasons for replacement of equipment. The next thing we look at is the factors necessary for replacement of equipment. What are those factors that make it necessary or necessitate for you to actually consider replacing this asset? So there are various factors which necessitate the replacement of machinery and equipment. And these factors can be categorized into 3 main categories. That is the technical factors, the financial or cost factors, then we have the tangible factors. So we shall start off with the technical factors. And for the technical factors, sometimes technical factors, we call them the cost factors. So these factors are similar to what you have just looked at, only that now we are categorizing them into the 3 main categories. So financial factors, you're looking at how much are we spending in terms of having this asset in the business? What is the cost associated with this? What are we losing? What are the benefits we're getting from this asset? So those factors that require the business, maybe the business is spending some money here and there, those ones we classify them as cost factors or financial factors. So we have several factors. In this case, the factors could comprise of high repair and maintenance costs. So in this case, you see that when there's a lot of cost you're incurring in terms of maintenance and repair, then you would rather let the asset go. You'd rather replace it, because there's no need for you to spend a lot of money repairing this asset every now and then. And yet you can be able to just buy a new machine that doesn't have a lot of repairs and maintenance costs. Then the other one is, the other factor that you need to consider is there a possibility that in the event that we acquire a new machine, can this new machine combine some operations which will result to increased productivity and reduced cost for the business? So you'll find that there are some cases whereby, due to newer technology, due to improvements in the level of technology, you find that it becomes the technology has been able to combine various stages of the production process into one. So maybe you had the assembly bit, and then maybe you had the manufacturing bit and the assembly bit. being done differently and the packaging bit being done differently. But now there's a machine that is able to manufacture this item, assemble them, and then package them. So in that case, you'll find that if there's that possibility, then it means that you'll be able to reduce your cost in the long run, because now you're combining some stages of the operation into one. You require less employees to do that, and yet the productivity is going to be high. So it means that in that case, you can consider, replacing the asset. You can consider replacing the asset with a new one. Then also, you just consider the cost of the challenger. When you say the challenger is the cost of the new machine, in this case, you consider the maintenance costs, the long run costs when you have this old machine, and the cost you're going to incur to get the new machine. Because if you realize that the new machine is not that old, buying a new machine is not that expensive, then you just rather replace it now. But if you realize that you're going to spend millions of shillings to acquire a new asset, and yet the maintenance requires you maybe 5,000 shillings, 2,000 shillings, as at this particular point in time, if the business doesn't have money to buy the new machine, then they can just consider going ahead with the old machine. But if the new machine is affordable, the company has funds, then they would rather just invest. They just invest in the new machine. Then we have the salvage value is also something that you need to consider. The salvage value is also known as the residual value or the terminal value. And this is the amount that the business will be selling off the asset or disposing this asset at. If you're to sell this asset today, how much are you going to get out of it? What is the scrap value of the asset? Will you be able to get a good amount out of it, or you're not going to get that much? So in this case, you just consider for this asset now, what is the scrap value? How much can we sell it at? Also for the asset that you're trying to buy, the new asset, how many years is it going to serve us? And at the end of its useful life again, what can we be able to fetch? How much money can the business be able to fetch out of that machine when they sell it off? Then also just look at the improvement in productivity and quality of the products that you produce in the event that you buy the new machine. Is it going to result in better quality products? Is it going to result in improved productivity? So when you consider those factors, then you can be able to now think if this is going to result in more units being produced, higher quality products, then you would rather do what? You would rather now consider replacing the asset with a new one, because at the end of the day, the newer asset is going to result in improved productivity, improved quality of the goods, which means that improved quality again, it means that you can be able to attract customers, because again, customers usually want high quality products. And then of course, if it's able to improve the productivity of the products, you're producing more units. So if you're producing more units, then it means that you can be able to sell more. And if you're able to sell more, that means that again, the sales revenue of the business is going to increase. So if sales revenue increases, what happens? If sales revenue increase, then it means that again, the profitability of the business is going to increase in the long run. So that is again another factor that you just need to consider. Then we also have saving in space by use of new machine, you're going to find that sometimes the old machines unapata ni kubwa. Let's take a consideration of the TVs, the television, zile zilikuanga za kitambo, zile ziko na mgongo. You find that it required a lot of space. So imagine, even at 32, let's say at just a 32-inch or a 40-inch television na iko na mgongo, just look at how much space that one will require. So you find that it will require a lot of space just to be able to replace this asset. Not to replace, but to store this asset. But if you are now looking into maybe newer models like the flat screen, now they just require small space. So you don't have to have a whole room just to have a 55-inch TV or a 65 or a 75-inch TV. That in that case, it is going to require a very, very small space. So that is, again, a factor that the business just needs to consider when looking into the financial factors before they consider the replacement of an asset. Then we have the tangible factors that you need to consider. And we haven't looked at, we've looked at the financial factors. Let's first look at the technical factors that you need to consider. So there are several technical factors that you need to take into consideration when it comes to the asset. And technical factors, basically this looks at the machine itself, how it is working, the safety of the machine, the ability of the machine to be able to produce these goods and services the way you desire. Is it able to function for the number of hours that you intend, or is it going to function for 2 hours in a day and then it breaks down? The quality of the products that are produced, again, what is it something that you can work with, or is it just too low for the organization? So you need to take those into consideration. So let's look at those technical factors that the business tend to consider. So the first thing you'll consider is whether the present equipment has become obsolete due to technological developments. So if it's become obsolete, it means that it is not able to provide the quality of goods and services that you desire, or what your competitors are also offering in the market. Then the other one is if the present equipment is inadequate in meeting increased product demand, it means that it doesn't have the capability to produce any more units. That you want 1,000 units, it's only able to produce 200 units. It means that you're losing out. The business will be losing out on a lot of money. If it was able to produce those high number of units, then it means that the organization will just be able to sell those units, get a lot of revenues out of it. But now you have demand for the products, and yet the items actually do not, what? They actually do not have the capacity to produce those number of units. Then the other factor that you need to consider is whether the present equipment has deteriorated due to wear and tear. And you see that when there's wear and tear, a lot of wear and tear, you have, if there's a lot of wear and tear, it means that you're going to have, again, a lot of maintenance costs. And sometimes the maintenance cost is just too much. So the business would rather just not, do what? Would rather just not have this asset anymore. They just rather replace that asset now instead of having to wait for the organization to pay so much in maintenance cost. Because the more you pay in maintenance cost, then the more you will be losing out. Because for your organization, you're spending so much money on this particular asset. And yet maybe you would have just changa yo pesa kidogo kidogo, that one would have actually reached the amount that you require for this particular, the amount that required for replacing this particular asset. Then we have reduced safety is also another important factor. If hizo machine zimeharibika ziko na parts zenye zinaweza dunga watu ama zinaweza fanya mtu ateguke, again, just replace that asset, because it means that it becomes a safety hazard when the employees use it, and when the employees use it and they are not able to, their health one is affected, or their safety again is affected. You see, their health could be affected if this machine is producing a lot of smoke, pollution. So that one would mean, or toxic substances into the air. It means that the health is going to be affected. And also safety, kama hii machine ukiitumia, it is going to bring about, let's say someone could easily get hurt. Maybe the components zinatokana haraka zikianguka. When you're using it, then what happens? It means that it's a safety hazard. And as a safety hazard, it means that you need to replace that asset. Then, of course, can the present equipment, this is another factor you need to consider, can the present equipment provide the desired surface finish? You see, some items, the finishing is very important. Let's say things such as furniture, things such as motor vehicles, there's that finishing. For example, motor vehicles, you need to do the buffing. So do you have the equipment that is going to give you the desired level of finishing for these assets? Because the finishing bit is going to influence the quality, because the finishing, mtu anaangalia this item, the way you have produced it, and what they're seeing is the final touches you've made. So for these final touches that you've made, is the business able to produce, or this machine, is it able to produce the final finish that you require to attract the consumers? Because if the finishing is bad, no one is going to want to buy that particular item. Then if the other factor you need to consider is if the present equipment is polluting or spoiling working condition of the industry. We've talked about this over and over again, that when there's pollution, then you find that again, there are laws against a certain level of pollution. So it means that the organization will have to pay a lot of fines with regard to that machine. So at the end of the day, you think the fines you're paying and the total amount that the business is incurring to just maintain this machine, we'd rather replace it with something new that is not going to bring us trouble with the law, and also something that is just efficient and effective, that doesn't cause any problems to the environment. And then the last one is, are there any possibilities of performing additional operations by the new machine? Saying that the new machines come with upgrades, and when these upgrades are made, it means that there's going to be, and these upgrades are made, then it means that maybe there are some things that the old machine wasn't doing. So this one, maybe you can be able to do some extra functions that the older machine was not doing. Then we have looked at the financial factors. The last factor we look at is the tangible factors. And when you're looking at tangible factors, basically you're looking at the sociological and sociological impact that your assets are going to have in the business. You see, as an organization, yes, you're a business, but also you are working within a particular society. So in this society, what impact are you creating? So if you find that your asset is actually causing a lot of harm to the society, it will mean that, because it is causing a lot of harm to the society, it will mean that you're creating a negative impact for society, and yet businesses are supposed to have a positive impact to the society. So for that particular reason, then just consider what are the sociological and humanitarian considerations that you need to factor in when it comes to these assets. Let it not be that your asset is causing a lot of unpleasantness for the society. Isikuwe tu mkiasha factory yenu machine nini yote inaamka, the whole community wakes up because it's too much noise, people can't even sleep, or there's too much pollution such that people can't even breathe in your organization because your organization has set up these machines. So you just consider the impact of your assets to the society and do what is best for the society. As much as you're thinking about profitability of your business, also consider the society in general. Don't just consider your business and how this one is impacting your business and your profitability. So we're saying that these factors involve sociological and humanitarian considerations with far-reaching effects. For example, replacing the existing machine, which causes unpleasantness. For example, it could be in the form of noise pollution or smoke pollution, or there are unsafe working conditions leading to accidents, but there's no need for you to put the society and your employees in danger simply because you don't want to spend money replacing the asset with a new one. Then the other thing is you also need to consider when you now are looking at replacing old asset with new asset, is it going to result in maybe unemployment and displacement of workers? You see, we've seen that as technological improvements are being made, the technological improvements, when they are being made, the organization now, sometimes it means that you don't need as many employees because most of the processes have been automated. So maybe where you needed 3, you only need 1 employee now. So also just consider what will be the impact of this machine. Is it going to automate the process to an extent that now it ends up displacing the workers? And when you displace these workers, will you be able to find them an alternative within the organization so that at the end of the day, they don't end up just being displaced without you finding for them maybe an alternative. Maybe they're not required sizing in the factory, but there's a department where their services and their skills can be utilized. So also just take that into consideration. Don't just look at the profits you're going to get out of it, but also the impact that this one is going to have on the society. So that is a very important factor that you need to consider. And then finally, we can finalize this and say that at the time of replacement, when you're doing the replacement, then you need to have a well-designed replacement policy that you're going to adopt, just instead of only considering the financial factors and the technical factors. Also just look at the tangible factors so that you can look at the benefits associated with the old asset, costs associated with the old asset, benefits associated with the new asset, and costs associated with the new assets. And then now finally, make up a decision on the asset, and when and how to replace that asset. So the next bit that we are going to look at is the assets. When you're now considering replacing an asset, you're saying that you need to have a policy within the organization. And the policy within the organization, this is whereby you decide that for our business, we will be replacing our assets when these conditions are fulfilled, or we will be replacing the asset after a certain number of years. Let's say We can't be replacing our asset after 2 years. We can't be replacing our asset after 3 years. We can't be replacing our asset after 4 years or something like that. So you have to come up with a policy on how we can be able now to replace, and how we will be able to replace that asset, and how we'll be able to replace that asset effectively, so that we don't have too much costs being incurred by the business. Because again, with asset replacement, there are some costs that will be associated with them. So just find a suitable approach for your organization, and then do that replacement. So the next thing that we will be looking at is the frequency of replacement of assets. Frequency of replacement of assets. On what frequency? Is it 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? Should we consider replacing the assets? So when you are looking at replacing of the assets, then the business should do what? The business should be computing something we call the effective, not the effective, but the equivalent annual cost. And by obtaining this equivalent annual cost, the organization can be able to determine which replacement schedule is going to result in the lowest cost being incurred by the business. Because at the end of the day, the business wants to maximize their profits, but minimize their costs. So they'll compute the effective annual, the equivalent annual cost, and then using this equivalent annual cost, then they'll choose the one that is going to have the lowest equivalent annual cost. So this equivalent annual cost is actually a method of just comparing what will be the total cost associated with an asset when you replace it after 1 year, when you replace it after 2 years, when you replace it after 3 years. Is there an amount which one is going to result in the lowest cost that the business is going to incur? So we usually compute the effective annual cost in 3 stages. We first calculate the present value of costs for all options. We looked at computing present values in the last class that we had. Then after you have calculated the present value of costs for all the options that you have, you go ahead and compute the effective annual cost for each option. And the effective annual cost is computed as the present value of the costs we divide by the annuity factor. And I remember we talked about the annuity factor again in the last class that we had. Then now you choose the options with the lowest effective annual cost. It means that the business will be able to just minimize the total cost associated with replacing the assets after a certain number of years. So there are various key assumptions. Even before we look at the method itself, there are some key assumptions that are usually implied under the ESC method of replacing assets. And the first assumption is that although the operating revenues are often deemed to be the same, using an older asset may not be as efficient. You'll find that sometimes we don't find differences between the revenues you're going to get between the old asset and the new asset. That maybe the revenues you're going to get are the same. Maybe the productivity level is the same between the old asset and the new asset. But you will find that as much as the revenues are the same, the costs associated with the older asset is going to be higher because of the maintenance costs. Then also the degree of efficiency associated with the older asset is going to be the same compared to the new asset. So saying that as much as we will be assuming, the assumption is that the operating revenues will be the same for an older asset and a newer asset, but the degree of efficiency for the older asset is not going to be the same as the one for a newer asset. Then also the assets are replaced in perpetuity. So in this case, you're assuming that the asset can be replaced at any given point in time in future until infinity. Then the last one is that we will be ignoring taxation and inflation. We'll not be taking into consideration the concept of inflation and taxation. So let's look at an illustration here. We have a company has a machine. The machine costed the business a total of 20,000 Kenya shillings. And 20,000 Kenya shillings. And for this amount of money, that is today the machine costs 20,000 Kenya shillings. This machine can be used for 2 years. And for those 2 years, there are going to be some running costs. This cost being the cost of operating these machines. So going to find that the machines could be, the first year, the operating cost will be 5,000. The second year, the operating cost could be 5,500. And then this machine has residual value or a scrap value that if the machine is sold, you have two options as a business. The machine can be sold either in the first year, and if you sell it in the first year, the business is going to get a total of 16,000 shillings out of it. And if you sell it in the second year, then it means that the business will get 13,000 shillings out of it. So should they replace the asset within the first year, or should they replace it after 2 years? And you've been told that the cost of capital is equal to 10%. So now we need to advise the business. Should they replace it after 1 year, or should they replace it after 2 years? So we will be considering the cash flows associated with this. We'll be considering if we buy this machine, the initial cost is 20,000. Then if we do the first year, we replace it within the first year, it means that we'll only incur the running cost for the first year. Then we can be able to sell it off for 16,000 Kenya shillings. So we go and compute the effective annual cost associated with replacing the asset in 1 year's time or replacing the asset in 2 years' time. And you see that to get the ESC, it is equal to the present value of the cost divided by the annuity factor. So we come and take into consideration this asset. If we are to replace it every single year, what will be the associated costs? So we have year 0. This is when the asset is being purchased. This is year 0. And then it is going to run for 1 year. This asset has a machine, is a machine, and it has the cost of 20,000. So this is how much the business is going to spend, 20,000 Kenya shillings. So you need to consider that. And in the first year, we say that for the first year, it is going to incur some maintenance costs of 5,000 Kenya shillings or $5,000. So for the $5,000, this is the costs for running, and then you sell it off, and you can be able to sell it off at a cost of 16,000. So we just consider what will be the net cash flows associated with these assets. In the first year, the total amount you're going to spend is 20,000. So that is a cost. Then in the first year, you have 5,000 being spent as a cost, and then you will receive an income of 16,000 when you sell off this asset. So it means that the net cash flow in the first year is going to be 11,000. When you say net cash flow, it means that how much in total are you going to remain with? So you spend 5,000, then you get 16,000, meaning that you're going to be left with 11,000 Kenya shillings. So the next thing that we need to do is to now compute the present value of these cash flows. And you say that the present value will be equal to the future value, then 1 plus r power negative n. This part here is what we call the present value interest factor, or simply called the discount factor. And we looked at this in the last class that we had. So in this case, the discount factor is going to be 1 plus r power negative n. So we want to see this cash flow that is receivable 1 year from now, how much will it be today, or how much will be the present value today, that is in year 0. So in this case, we had been given that the discount rate is at, the cost of capital is 10%, meaning that we will discount this cash flows at the rate of 10%. So we're going to have the discount factor 1 plus r. R is our interest rate. In this case, it is 10. So 1 plus 0.1 power negative. And in this case, n is the number of years. And in this case, it is 1 year. In this case, you'll have 1.1 power negative 1. That will give us 0.9091. So therefore, we discount this cash flow. We say the future value is 11,000. So therefore, 11,000 multiplied by this value of 0.9091. That one should give us a total of 9,999. That is 11,000 multiplied by 0.9091. That one should give us this 9,999. So this is now how much the cash flow is going to be, or this cash flows, the net cash flows receivable in year what? In year 1. If we were to sell this asset in year 1, that is how much the business is going to incur. So therefore, now we have here 0.9091 is multiplied by 11,000, and say this one is going to give us 9,991. In year 0, that is now the present day. So it means that the discount factor is going to still be the same. So that is 1 plus 0.1 power 0. That one should give us 1. So in that case, it is going to remain the same. So this cash flow, 20,000 multiplied by 1, because it is in its present value already, we don't need to convert it. And even if we convert it, we multiply by a discount factor of 1. That one should give us still 20,000 Kenya shillings. So now that we've gotten the present value, then we can go ahead and compute the net present value, which then we can use to obtain the discount factor. We talked about the net present value again in the last class. We said that the net present value will be equal to the present value of the cash inflows minus the present value of the cash outflows. In this case, the present value of cash inflows is obtained as 9,999 minus the 20,000. In this case, minus the 20,000. In this case, we're going to get 10,001 as our 10,001 as our net present value, which then we can go ahead and compute our effective annual cost. So that the effective annual cost will be equal to the net present value divided by the discount factor. And in this case, the discount factor we have obtained as 0.909. In this case, we say 10,001 divided by 0.909. That one should give us an effective annual cost of 11,002. So that is if the company was to replace the asset every single year. So what if now, because we have two options, either we replace it every single year or we replace it after, we replace it every single year or we replace it after every 2 years. So in this case, let's consider, again, we consider the cash flows, all cash flows associated with this item. So if we don't replace it within 1 year, then it means that we replace it within 2 years, meaning that the residual value is going to be 13,000. And it means that we're also going to incur running costs of year 1 and also the running costs for the second year. So we come here and show the various years. So in this case, we have year 0, this is today, then 1 year after replacement, and then 2 years after, not after replacement, 1 year after acquisition, and then 2 years later, you replace the asset. The machine still going for the cost of 20,000. The running cost for this asset is in the first year, 5,000, in the second year, 5,500. And then the residual value is going to come in the last year, this case of 13,000. So then we get the net cash flows just to see in total how much is the net cash flows. In year 0, we only spent 20,000 for the machine. Year 1, we have running costs of 5,000. And then in year 2, the company is going to have a cash outflow of 5,500 and an inflow of 13,000. When we net them off, we get 7,500. So these cash flows, again, we discount them back to their present values. So for year 0, we're saying that this one is already in its present value. So it is going to be discounted at discount factor of 1, which is still going to remain at 20,000. Then this one we had already computed. We say that present value is equals to the future value, 1 plus r power negative n. In this case, we had already computed for 1 year. We got 0.9091. So for the second year, the discount factor will be 0.1, 1 plus 0.1 power negative 2. That one should give us 0.826. So therefore, we now have our discount factor. So we say that it will be the future value being 5,000 and 7,500. We multiply by the discount factor of 0.9091 for year 1 and 0.826 for year 2. So therefore, we multiply 5,000, which is the net cash flow for year 1, 5,000 times 0.9091. That should give us 45.35. Then we have, for the second year, we have 7,500 multiplied by 0.826. That one should give us 6,195. Then we can go ahead and now compute the total effective annual cost. So for the effective annual cost, you say that first we have to get the NPV, and the NPV, you say that it is the present value of all cash inflows minus present value of cash outflows. So in this case, we just add up our cash inflows. We had, this is 45.45 plus 61.95. How much should that give us? So we have, we can say 45.45 plus 61.95. That one should give us 10,740. And then from there on, we deduct what? So we have the 61.95, and then minus the initial cost. Remember here we had the initial cost. This one is actually a negative. So yes, we have two negative values here because now this one was an expense. So the only positive value we have is this 61.95. So it means that therefore to get the NPV, we say that it's the present value of cash inflows minus present value of cash outflows. So we have 61.95 minus 20,000, and then also there's this 45.45. So we can add the negatives that we need to subtract. So we'll have 24,545. We deduct this from 61.95. That one should give us a total of negative 18,350. So this negative 18,350, we use it as our NPV. So we come here and say our NPV is 18,350. In this case, we're going to we'll ignore the negative sign and then divide it by our discount factor. So the discount factor, in this case, we had two discount factors. We had for the first year, and then we had also for the second year. So in that case, therefore, to get the total discount factor, we're just going to add the discount factors for the 2 years. So we'll add 0.909 plus 0.826. That one should give us 1.736. So therefore, we divide by 1.736. We should be able to get 10,570. So in this case, within that, having ignored the negative sign, we get an EAC of 10,570. And the criteria for selecting the number of years to be used for replacement is for the organization to choose the one that is going to give us the lowest EAC. So if you're to replace within 1 year, the EAC is going to be 11,002. If you're to replace it within 2 years, then it will be 10,570. So it means that the machine should replace this asset every 2 years because it is going to be cheaper because it is associated with a lower EAC. So that is how we classify or how we categorize the replacement of assets, or how we compute the replacement of assets, whether to replace it within 1 year, whether to replace it within 2 years. The organization can choose by using the one that is going to be associated with a lower EAC. So that is how we make decisions regarding, that is how the business makes decisions regarding the EAC. So the last thing that I want us to look into is the disposal of assets and the journal entries that are associated with the disposal of an asset. You will find that there are some, you have decided that, yes, we are going to replace an asset, and also how to, we're going to replace an asset. So when you replace an asset, it means that you are going to dispose of the old assets. So when you are now thinking about the asset disposal, remember that this asset was already in the books of the business. When you acquire an asset in the business, you're going to find that when a new asset is bought, for example, you usually record the asset. So let's say you bought a machine, and this machine costs the business, let's say, 100,000 Kenya shillings. You usually record this asset in the book. So you show that the asset has, we have an increase in an asset. So we usually open a machine account or the asset account, and you, when you open the asset account, we usually debit the asset account because an increase in an asset is usually treated as a debit entry. So what happens for this new asset, you are going to record it. And when you record it, you open an account and say that this asset is a new asset, it is a machine. So you open a machine account, you debit that asset, and you show the value is 100,000 Kenya shillings. This asset, for every debit entry, there's always a credit entry. So let's say the business has bought this asset on cash. So it means that because it has bought it on cash, then it means that the asset of cash has reduced. So you open the cash account and you are going to credit the asset account of cash, showing that the business has used funds. And because it has used these funds, then it means that what? Then it means that the asset has gone down, the value of that asset has gone down, so you credit that account. And that is just based on the rules of the double entry. So now you have an asset that you have recorded in the business. This asset, now you're thinking that we need to dispose it of. So when these fixed assets are disposed of, it means that this account that you had opened here is no longer going to be there in the organization. You need to remove this off. So what you usually do is that the business now has to dispose it off, and the disposing off means that you need to close off the old asset account and open a new close it off. So just close that asset off and show that it has been disposed. So how you are going to record it is going to be dependent on the asset itself. Has this asset been depreciated before? Because you find that the asset sometimes they had not been depreciated. So if the asset had not been depreciated, then it will be easy to just dispose it off. If the asset had not been depreciated, it means that all you need to do is you need to close off the old account. So remember, for this asset, initially you had recorded it as the new asset. So you had here the asset account. And in the asset account, what had you done? You had debited the machine. So in this case, you had the machine and you showed here the machine account. It was worth 100,000 Kenya shillings. And then now you had credited the cash account. And in this case, it shows that you had used a cash amounting to 100,000 Kenya shillings. So now you want to sell off. So you need to close this account. So upon disposal, you're going to open a disposal account. In this disposal account, you're going to debit it with the value of the machine. So in this case, you open a disposal account and you do what? You show that now we have disposed a machine that was worth 100,000 Kenya shillings. So this machine, see, initially you had debited it. So in order for you to show that the machine is no longer there or that you're disposing it of, you credit the machine account with the 100,000 Kenya shillings. Let me show you again. Let me show you what? Let me show you again using now the entries itself. Let me show you the debiting and the crediting, what we mean when it comes to these machines. So saying that initially you had a machine account. This is how a ledger account appears. On one side, we have the debit. On the other side, we have the credit. So let's say we had here, this is the machine account. So initially you bought it, let's say on the 8th of November 2020. And you had bought it for cash and it was 100,000 shillings, 100,000 Kenya shillings. So you come here and showed 100,000 Kenya shillings. So all along, you have a debit balance of the machine, showing that you have. So you'd open a cash account as well and credit the cash account, but that one is not necessary for this illustration. So when you have this balance here, it means that you always have this machine and the machine is present. So when you will be closing down, you will be closing down and show that we have a balance carried down of 100,000 Kenya shillings. When you open the next year, you're going to start with a balance brought down of 100,000 Kenya shillings. But now you dispose of this asset during the year. We say that when you dispose the asset, then you will credit the machine account. So you come here and show that now we're disposing of this asset, and maybe you're disposing the asset at the same price at which you bought it. Maybe you've not depreciated it, the value is still the same. In this case, you close off this account by now crediting the machine account and show that this one is being disposed of, and you're disposing it off and it had a value of 100,000 Kenya shillings. In this case, you call it the disposal account, you credit it and show that now this one you're transferring the value to the disposal account. And you have here, you show that we're disposing this account and it is a machine and it was worth 100,000 Kenya shillings. So that now when you come here, you'll not have any balance brought down at the end of the year, meaning that this machine is going to cease to exist in the business because you have a debit of 100 and a credit of 100, meaning that now the asset has been disposed of from the business. There's no balance carried down. So when you start off the next year, this machine is not going to be in existence. In this case, we'll say that to show the disposal of machines, then you're going to do what? You are going to be showing that for this particular asset, then it is no longer there in the business, and therefore we have disposed it off. And this is assuming that the business had this machine and the machine was not being depreciated. But you'll find that in most cases, machinery is depreciated. So let's look at a case whereby the machine had been depreciated. So let's say still we have that machine, and the machine was worth 100,000 Kenya shillings. So what happens is that you usually record depreciation when it comes to the machine. So let's say you had a machine, and this machine had been bought at 100,000 Kenya shillings. We had here the machine had been bought at a cost of 100,000 Kenya shillings, and it was being depreciated, and you're depreciating it at using the straight line method, and it was supposed to last for, let's say, 5 years. So it means that if now you dispose it off at the end of 5 years, and let's say it doesn't have any salvage value, it means that the depreciation every single year will be equal to, depreciation is usually equal to the cost of the machine divided by the useful life. So let's say the useful life was 5 years. It means that each year the machine is going to be depreciated at the rate of 20,000 per annum. That will be the depreciation per annum. So now let's say you have the machine is disposed of after 2 years, and then you sell it off at a price of, let's say, 70,000 Kenya shillings. We want to know, how do you dispose of this machine? So when it comes to recording the asset, you're going to have to maintain several accounts. And you will maintain an account for the machine itself. The machine account is always recorded at its cost. So we'll have here the machine account. So you come here and show the machine had been bought in, and it had been bought in for cash at 100,000 Kenya shillings. We usually open, when you have a machine and you're depreciating it, we usually open a accumulated depreciation account. So we'll come here and show that for this asset, the machine has been depreciated. So we'll have accumulated depreciation account. And this accumulated depreciation is basically how much you have been depreciating this machine over the years. So the accumulated depreciation account, because it is a reduction in the value of an asset, the accumulated depreciation account, usually we record it on the credit side. So in this case, the first year, so we can come here and show that for the first year, you depreciated this machine. And in this case, the depreciation usually transfer, or the double entry is usually to the depreciation expense account, because this is an expense to the business. So it usually appears both in the statement of profit or loss, or the income statement, and also in the statement of financial position. So the cross-reference will be to the depreciation expense account in the first year. And you've depreciated this asset for 20,000. You've computed that the depreciation per annum is going to be equal to 20,000. In the second year, so you close off the first year, you balance off. In this case, you come here and show the balance that is going to be carried down is equals to 20,000 for each year. So when you open now the second year, you're going to start off with a balance of 20,000 as well. So you'll have here a balance brought down of 20,000. And then now you add the depreciation expense for this year. So in this case, it will be another 20,000 because you're depreciating it for a period of 2 years. So in this case, the total depreciation will be equal to 40,000. So when you replace off this asset, or when you dispose it off in the second year, it means that you have now what will be the remaining value of this asset will be the initial cost of the asset minus the total depreciation of 40,000. So the value of this asset, the book value, will be equal to 60,000. So now you have replaced the asset. And because you have replaced the asset, you sold the asset, you disposed the asset, and you sold the asset at 70,000. So it means that you have sold this asset at a higher cost than the value of the asset itself. It means that you have a profit upon the disposal of the asset. So you need to factor in how do we now record this in the books of the business. So in this case now, you come here and show how much is the gain on disposal. That upon the disposal of this asset, the asset had a net book value. So you have sold it at how much? So the sales value you're getting is of 70,000 in shillings. And then the net book value of this asset is that has a value of 60,000, meaning that you have what we call a gain on the disposal. And in this case, the gain on disposal is equal to an amount of 10,000 Kenya shillings. So you have to show this asset. So you have to dispose of the asset and show how much this asset is going to, or show how now you have disposed of this asset. So now you come here and show, remember your asset had a value. The asset had a value of how much? 100,000 Kenya shillings. So you need to close off this account. So you come here and show that now we have disposed of the asset. So you transfer this value to the disposal account. So it means that now you open the disposal account. So come here and show, here we have the disposal account. And for this disposal account, we are selling off the machine. So we credit the machine account and show that this machine, which initially had a value of 100,000, we no longer have it. So we have disposed it off. So we come here and debit. We've credited the machine account. We come here and credit the disposal account and show that now we are replacing the machine, which we had bought in at a price of 100,000 Kenya shillings. So you have done the disposal of the machine, and now you're showing that this machine is no longer in the books of the business. And because it's no longer in the books of the business, then you also show that now the machine has been disposed of. But upon the disposal of this machine, you find that the business has been able to obtain some cash out of it. So the business has obtained cash. So it means that now you also have to record the amount of cash that the company has received from the disposal of that asset. So also now show the proceeds associated with these assets. So you have sold it off, and you have sold the machine, and it is because of the disposal. So in this case, you're going to come here and show that now this disposal for the machine has been paid off in the form of cash. And we paid for this machine. And this machine actually received a total amount of cash of 70,000 Kenya shillings for the machine. Remember, this machine, we had depreciated it. the accumulated depreciation was equals to how much? The accumulated depreciation was equal to a total of 40,000 Kenya shillings. So in this case, it means that we also need to close off this account. So we close off this account by showing again, or we close off the accumulated depreciation account. So in this case, we had a balance here of 40,000 Kenya shillings. So to close off the account, we debit there. We show that now for this accumulated depreciation, because it was associated with this machine, which we've sold off, now that the machine has been sold, we also need to close down the accumulated depreciation account. So we come here and transfer these figures again to the disposal account. So we debit the accumulated depreciation account with the total amount of accumulated depreciation so far, which is equals to 40,000. On the disposal account, even before we take into consideration the cash, on the disposal account, we come here and show that now this machine had an accumulated depreciation and it was equal to a total of 40,000 Kenya shillings. Then now, so it means that if we have debit of 100 and credit of 40, then it means that essentially you have a debit balance of 60,000. Then you have come in and you have sold this asset and you've sold it at a cash amount of 70,000 Kenya shillings. So you come here and show that as a result of the disposal of this machine, we've been able to get a total of 70,000 Kenya shillings. So we have debited the cash account because this is an increase in the asset of cash. So we're supposed to debit. We go now to our disposal account. For every debit entry, there's also an associated credit entry. In this case, an amount of 70,000 Kenya shillings. So now we close off the account. You'll see that there is now on the debit side, we have 100,000. On the credit side, we have 110,000 Kenya shillings. So we say here 110,000. So the difference between the two is the gain on disposal. That now the difference between 110 and 100,000 is the balancing figure. And that balancing figure is the gain on disposal of that asset. So we show here gain on disposal, an amount of 10,000 Kenya shillings. So that is how we are expected to show in the event that the company has sold an asset and this asset has been disposed and the business has been able to get a return out of it. So we can summarize this. We can summarize these transactions into simple journal entries and show that the first step is to close off the machine account or whatever the asset account is. As we did initially, you remember we say that the asset, if you have the asset, you need to close off the asset account. So in this case, you're supposed to open two accounts. So the machine account, you credit it, you debit the disposal account. So we come here, we can see that disposal of machine. So to close now the accounts, the machine account, so you're going to debit the disposal account with the amount of the cost of the machine, and then you credit off the machine account. That one will now remove this machine from the books of the business. Then you also remove the accumulated depreciation associated with this machine. So remove accumulated depreciation. In this case, you're going to debit the accumulated depreciation associated with this machine, and then you credit the disposal account. So that one, we can know what is the net book value associated with this asset. And then now you record the proceeds. record the sale proceeds. How much you're getting from the sales. In this case, you're going to debit the cash account, and you debit the cash account with the amount you have received, and then you credit the disposal account. So you credit the disposal account with the amount as well. That one should be able to give us the total amount that the business is going to be making out of the total amount that the business is going to make out of this disposal. So the balancing figure is going to be the gain on disposal. So that is how we are expected to record transactions relating to the disposal of non-current assets in the company. So if anyone has a question on what we have looked at with regard to the disposal of non-current assets or assets in the business, then you can unmute. You ask your question, and then thereafter we can stop there. Okay. So if you have no question, then we can stop there for today.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Though it's for the last paper.
Uh-huh.
It says highlight 5 factors considered when developing a procurement and asset disposal plan for an organization.
Okay. Uh-huh. So you will highlight?
Highlight 5 factors
Uh-huh.
considered when developing
Uh-huh.
a procurement and asset disposal plan for an organization.
Okay. That one is in the last sittings paper?
Yes.
Okay. So there are some factors that you're supposed to consider when developing the disposal, the disposal plan. And these factors will comprise of various things. Let me just list them down so that you can be able to follow through. Okay, so the factors that we need to consider when developing a procurement and asset plan is essentially the things we had looked at. We had looked at some factors. In this case, we looked at the technical factors. We looked at the technological factors, not technological, but financial factors. And then we also looked at the tangible factors. So when you're developing your asset plan, then you need to take those factors into consideration that you're supposed to consider. For example, the capital cost of the new asset, how much is it going to cost you? You are expected to consider again the sources of the funds. You're supposed to consider the operating or running costs of the existing assets. You are expected now to consider those technological factors, the tangible factors, and then the financial factors. Those are the ones we will be regarded as the factors to consider when you're developing the procurement and asset disposal plan. So unless we have another question, we can stop there, and then we'll finish off the syllabus on Wednesday with the other group. So in the Wednesday's class at 7, again, we log in, we do the budgets, and then thereafter we conclude the syllabus. And with that, with that, I'd like to wish you a good day ahead, a good week, actually, a nice week ahead, and see you on Wednesday. I hope you guys have started revision for the class. I hope you started the revision for this unit, because I know the time is also not on our side. So make sure you work on that. You do your revisions. We will, if we get time, we'll do a bit of revision again with the other group. A revision of questions, the past paper questions on this unit. So goodbye, and see you on Wednesday at 7. Goodbye.